Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Cloud Native Now podcast. I am Sharon Florentine. I am here again with Mike Vizard, and we are going to kick off this week talking about a great conversation that Mike had with Solomon Hykes. That is over on TechStrong TV. I'm going to ask you, Mike, to sum up that conversation, and then we can segue it into our conversation.
Yeah, well, Solomon and team have been trying to figure out a way to build, or at least automate the building of pipelines that we use to construct applications in our CI/CD platforms. And it's been something people have been trying to do for a while, and there's merit to the case, but it was just interesting to listen to him talk about there is no silver bullet for creating a DevOps platform. And even he was saying there's always going to be work involved here. I mean, organizations got to go in there and define these pipelines. I think what we're saying is Dagger makes it simpler to build those pipelines, but I don't see it as some kind of magic thing. And I'm not even sure, there was a lot of hype because he was involved that people were saying this is going to be the greatest thing since Docker. Right. I think it's just another tool in the case that we can pull out as needed. But even he is kind of basically saying, yeah, we're doing something and it's cool and it adds value. But I don't think he's standing up there going, this is, Docker 2.0, as it were.
Right. And so a couple years ago when when Dagger first kind of blew onto the scene, we actually published a piece on DevOps.com talking about how Dagger was going to be the holy grail of standardizing CI/CD pipelines. And obviously, it seems like that has not come to pass based on what we know and what we've seen over the last 2 years. And it also seems like a lot of that, like you said, may have been driven just by his well-known celebrity in the industry as, former Docker. And so maybe he was playing on that a little bit, but it is still interesting to see that this is still an issue.
Well, I think we're still looking for the original Holy Grail, so that tells you something about the probability assessment of that being the Holy Grail for anything. Right. I think what he's pointing at is that it's getting more complex to build the pipelines in the age of microservices and containers because the containers come and go, and there's a lot more microservices and APIs and a lot more calls being made. So we need a higher level of abstraction. And that's true, but it's only one piece of the puzzle. So calling something, the magic holy grail, silver bullet, pick your buzzword choice there as you see fit. It's a disservice to, the people who are building this stuff. They know better. And,
right.
They have experience in this space. So I think, we're getting realistic, and it's maybe high time where we, even with Docker, I mean, that was supposed to solve all our portability issues, but doesn't really work so well when you move from Linux to Windows. And there's still a lot of issues with, now we got more container types than ever, and we're trying to run these things on different platforms. And so the portability issue goes beyond just, the software artifact itself. So I just think we're getting a little more mature here about our use of hopefully hyperbole and toning it down.
I don't know. The hyperbole definitely seems to appeal to some readers and viewers. So maybe we'll just tone it down a little bit.
There you go. Go ahead.
I was going to say, speaking of Holy Grail portability, we published a piece also this week that you reported on and wrote about Diagrid's Conductor Enterprise. And that is based on Dapr, which is a framework for running or deploying microservices on Kubernetes clusters. So I'm going to let you dive a little deeper into that and explain what that means to the cloud native ecosystem here.
Well, this too, when it first came out, was a holy grail. So we had a lot of holy grails there for a while. But I think people are getting used to the notion here. Dagger is basically saying that they will centrally manage your instances of this platform for essentially, providing a framework for integrating the microservices themselves, so you don't have to constantly do that yourself. But there's winds up being a lot of these in runtime, so centrally managing those things requires somebody who's going to do the updates and kind of take care of all the operational scut work that a lot of folks prefer not to do because, well, they want to write code.
Right.
I
but
think,
it's not the set it and forget it again that everybody kind of seems to want to move toward.
Yeah, I don't think there is a set it and forget it. I mean, basically, there's a either set it and do it yourself or get somebody else to manage it kind of thing.
Right.
But somebody's got to do the lift, right? At the end of the day, they may have come up with ways to automate it more, but it still needs to be deployed, updated, secured, and all those things don't ever go away just because something has been deemed to be the latest, coolest thing going.
Yeah, yeah. And it seems like, adoption has been pretty steady. They're claiming it's 10,000 developers now using it. And that's not insignificant, but
if you assume that there are 50 million plus developers, they got a long way to go.
Yeah, indeed.
Now, how many of them are running on Kubernetes? Let's assume that there's 7 million of those. You still got a long way to go.
Yeah. Yep. Right. Well, and since we're talking about yet another potential holy grail here, Trafic is updating its API gateway to add support for Wasm, as well as OpenTelemetry and the Kubernetes Gateway API. And so if we're talking about holy grails, you can't not talk about Wasm. And, that's supposed to solve the portability issue, right? So how does this...
Yeah, Wasm is coming along as something that is more portable, that will run on the server side. I don't think it replaces containers as much as it allows certain classes of applications to become more portable because the code will run on both the client and the server side. And it's basically a format. We'll have tools that will make that more accessible to folks. In this case, we're talking about, how to invoke those modules using an API and accessing them through a gateway that's provided by Trafic Labs. I'll be honest, this whole space around application networking gives me a freaking headache. And
you and me both.
And here's the thing about it. It's so, most people, you start out with a handful of APIs and you're kind of like, okay, I'm going to use a proxy, and they'll go get one of those. And, some are lighter weight than others, but people have been doing that forever and a day. Then we get into this notion of API gateways, which are kind of like the next level of abstraction up. And they're typically built on some sort of proxy, and that becomes a little easier for people to manage. A lot of times they'll either do that in an on-premise environment or they'll be up in the cloud. Trafic is trying to make a case for one integrated platform for all of that. But behind that is this, whole service mesh concept, which is also based on proxy software, which is, from my perspective, API management at an even higher level of scale. And it's not clear to me how many APIs I have to have before I need a service mesh versus an API gateway. But
right.
I'm thinking, you got to be into the hundreds to get a service mesh, and we'll see how that goes. And a lot of folks are going to be like, do I need a service mesh or do I need, 3 API gateways? I couldn't tell you the answer, but I bet you one thing, one's a lot cheaper and a lot easier to deploy, even if you have 3 of them. So, these are issues that go into people's thinking and decision making. A lot of it comes from where you start too. I think if you've got a platform engineering team and you're putting together, the end all be all for programmable operations, yeah, service mesh looks great. But who's in charge of that? Is it the networking team or is it the DevOps team? Nobody seems to know. On the other end of it, your average developer looks at all this stuff and says, proxy software and maybe an API gateway I can wrap my head around. And service mesh is a little scary. And some of them find Linkerd because it's an easier service mesh. But I think the default option is just to go with the animal in the zoo. And that seems to be the proxy software. And then, and then I hope to have a scalability problem someday when I need an API gateway. And I hope that somebody else's problem.
Right. Right. And then, even if you decide that you need the networking team or developers or someone to manage all this, good luck finding them, because then you're kind of stuck with whoever's already in your organization that maybe can get a crash course in how to do it. It seems like, there's always that issue. Even if you decide that someone else should be handling it, if they don't already work there, good luck. I mean,
in theory, layers 1 through 3 should be run by the networking team because that's the underlay.
Yep.
Layers 4 through 7 are increasingly becoming what is known as programmable application networking services. But the number of people who know how to manage that is low. And the number of networking people who are willing to give up control of layers 4 through 7 are even lower. Yep. So there's kind of this, back and forth and a little tension in the system that has to get worked out before all this application networking stuff becomes, shall we say, a de facto standard of some type or other.
All that being said, we keep talking about microservices and modernizing applications. And is there really an advantage between monoliths and microservices?
This is an ongoing conversation, and I was talking to the CEO of Flagrant about this particular issue, Jim Resnick. And his point of view on it is that monoliths are better. And his view was, hey, they're easier for developers to wrap their arms around. There's not as many moving parts, and it just gets too difficult to manage microservices at scale. There's a lot of folks who started out building some sort of microservices application and rolled back to the monolith approach because they were like, we cannot wrap our heads around all this, and we don't have an engineering team the way Netflix does to put on every microservice. So it becomes, financially and unwieldy, shall we say, to kind of do this at scale. I think a lot of folks.
Was it Amazon that was the recent, famous example of? Is that who it was that tried to do microservices for their streaming video, and then it turned out to be such a headache that they rolled back?
Yeah, I think that, they tried to imitate the Netflix approach, and, it's challenging and it's hard. And I think that's why we don't see as many of these so-called cloud native applications just yet, because we haven't figured out the tooling to make it easy. And most developers are like, where's my web framework that I just used to build a monolith? And then they are like, I want to go home and I'm done. And it's 5:00 and I got things to do.
Yep.
No, I don't think they want to be on call for this microservices thing that they built 24/7. And they're not, they're like, I didn't sign up to be the guy with the beeper on my belt waiting for a call because somebody doesn't like something at 4:00 in the morning, which is inevitably when that will happen.
Right.
So there's this whole notion that, you wrote it, you own it. Well, I'm not seeing the bulk of developers sign up for this program. I think, you can mandate it in certain companies if you started out that way from scratch, but I'm suspicious of even the folks who say that that's what they're doing, because I'm like, well, when do you sleep and who's going to own it when you're sleeping? So there's a lot of little nuances here in this whole microservices thing. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but I think we got to think it through. And sometimes, I half joke, a monolith is nothing more than just a big ass microservice. And then I got a bunch of little microservices that wrapped around it that call stuff through APIs. And that's not an unreasonable approach till you figure out how you can carve more pieces of that monolith off into something that's a manageable set of microservices. But I think we got into a head about, it was going to be one way or the other. And I got a feeling it's, as always with IT, a little bit of a mix of everything.
Yeah. Yep. I have a feeling that you're right.
I don't know, when we're going to have this adult moment, but I feel like
it's coming. I think it's coming very soon. I feel like all of these factors are converging, and eventually they're going to crash into each other.
Yeah. And I just don't know where the source of this conversation comes from. I mean, is it the vendors who are out there, like, touting a particular platform, so therefore this is the new hammer and everything must become a nail that fits that hammer? Or because I'm not hearing the developers saying all this stuff. I mean, if I go to a conference, I don't see somebody walking down the hallway with a T-shirt that says microservices are bust.
Right.
So I feel like developers are just trying to figure out what's the best path to write some code and get something done and meet a deadline. And, maybe we've all gotten into this whole argument about this versus that. And they kind of probably go home at night and say, I don't know what those guys are talking about. I'm glad to know about this tool versus that tool. But at the end of the day, whichever one gets me home at 6 o'clock is the winner.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know. We have a KubeCon coming up, which is in Paris this year. This is the KubeCon European event, and we're going to be there doing some video interviews live with folks. So if you're listening to this and you're going to be in the neighborhood, come on by the booth and say hi. We'd love to chat and get some of your opinions and see what's going on. Otherwise, Sharon, you got anything else you want to add?
I don't. I think that is it for this week, folks. And we look forward to seeing you again next time. Thanks so much for tuning in, and have a great rest of your day.
All right. We'll see you guys. Bye.